Welcome to another Art of Composing daily vlog. This is John Brantingham on the microphone, and today I thought I would talk a little bit about my template for film scoring. The template that you use is a very personal thing, so I'm not going to say that this is the one and only way to do it, but this is just my way of doing things, and I found that it's really helpful having everything pre-set up exactly how you want, and so that you understand all your audio routing, all the MIDI routing, how you're going to be recording, how you're going to be adding effects. And a lot of this has been built up over the years from tips from all sorts of different composers. A lot from Brian Ralston, who I took the Digital Performer course from at UCLA, and just lots of tips and tricks all over the place. So let's go ahead and dive right in. You'll see that the way I've got it all laid out, it's pretty clean, really, at the base level. I try to keep everything organized in a very clear way. So you'll see I have basically three main folders here. I've got stems, which we'll go over what that is in a minute. I've got auxiliary effects and instruments, and then I've got my MIDI tracks. So first, let's talk about stems, because this is kind of where everything culminates. When you're scoring, you're required often to deliver the final stems, which is the audio tracks with the effects built in. And I want to clarify that it's different from something called a multi-track, which the multi-track often is just kind of the raw audio files without the effects. So if you're sending your stuff off to a mixer who's going to be mixing your score and then sending it over to the dubbing stage or something like that, you'll give them the multi-track without the effects. If you are using no mixer and you're sending it straight to the dubbing stage or whoever's putting it into the film, then you'll probably just send them the stems. And you'll see here I've got everything routed to one final full mix track. This is the sum of everything here, although it's a little deceptive, and we'll dive into that in 1 second, how I've got my auxiliaries set up. And then below that, I've got just basic, the basic kind of groups within the orchestra. So woodwinds high and low, brass high and low, percussion high and low. I've got like a rock band set up. I've got a jazz band set up, because I find I often have to do just stuff with a band, and I want to have that separated out, not necessarily like the drums go to the percussion stem. I've got pitch percussion here. I've got choir. I've got an unused one, which is like an extra setup, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I've got strings high and low, synth, and then I've got a separate track for my room reverb, which is all these tracks. If you'll notice here, I've got all of these with a send, and the send goes to the room reverb, which we'll talk about when we get to the auxiliaries and effects over here. But what that does is it basically sends a copy of the audio to another stereo bus, which can then mix everything in my reverb plugin, and then I record that reverb separately. That way I can turn it on and off. Let me see if I pull up like a piano or something right now. Let me pull up a piano. If you listen to that, it's got the reverb baked in, but now if I turn it off, you can kind of hear it's a little bit subtle. I don't personally like a ton of reverb. I like it a little bit drier. So that's how my stems are routed, or that's how the stems are kind of set up. Now, if you look here, I've also got battery stems. Battery is a drum machine thing from Native Instruments, and I find that I want to route those stems separately in a different way, and I do this because often you have to. I use that for like EDM style drums, and you have to treat those different. You often have to put sidechain compression and have it pumping on all the other stems and everything. So I treat those ones a little bit different. I have them separately routed, and I separate all the different elements, so bass drum, snare, hi-hat. That way I can really get in and tweak that stuff. And then what I've also done is I've added auxiliary tracks, which are acting kind of as auxiliary tracks only for their respective stems. And what that allows me to do is to insert into this chain whatever kind of effect that I want, and that'll actually get recorded and written onto the actual audio stems that I deliver. That way I can get real precise. If I want to add just an extra whatever, EQ to the entire woodwind chain, if I were to add it up here as an insert, it actually won't get recorded properly on here. I have to add it, or like, let's say that I record the track and then I say, oh, I want to add the EQ on top of that. It's not going to be actually recorded on here. The effect won't be. But if I add it on here to the stems or to the auxiliary tracks, I'll know for a fact that it's going to be recorded. So so that's how I do that. Now let's go ahead and jump down to the standard auxiliary tracks. I use something called Vienna Ensemble Pro, and what that means is that I can load up all my instruments on another computer, which saves a ton of RAM and a ton of CPU power. And what I have to do is I have to route all of those into individual audio tracks. And I do this so that I can get very precise on how I mix things. Like, for instance, down here you'll notice I've got the flute, and I've got the flute turned down. It's probably because I felt it was a little bit louder than everything else, and it just doesn't need to stick out like that. So this way I can pre-mix. I've also got EQ on the oboes already pre-built in to take away just a little bit of the high end. So I like to route through a lot of auxiliary tracks. It gives me a lot of control over the final sound. You'll notice here on the Rock Band one, I have these not as aux tracks, but as stereo audio tracks. That's just a little bit more control. Once again, mixing orchestral stuff is a little bit different than mixing rock stuff, and I often want to really kind of get in and tweak and mess with the sounds on like the rock and dance things. And right now I've got this template set up for the soap opera I'm scoring. So I've been using some of these sounds specifically, a dulcimer and a mandolin and guitar. And then we talked about the room reverb. I like, not a ton of reverb, just enough to give it a little bit of presence. A lot of these already have reverb built in. So if we jump down to the MIDI tracks, let me go ahead and open these up. I have just your standard style orchestra with, I sometimes I have combined tracks that have multiple articulations on one track, and I do that in Contact. And I don't know if this will actually record over here. I think it will. But if you'll notice here, let me open up my Spitfire strings. You'll see that the violins here are all on the same channel, right? They're MIDI channel 1 and then audio channel 1, the output audio. And that means that I'm actually switching, and if you've got Spitfire stuff, you'll know that they've got their UACC, so you can lock to control changes to change articulations instead of key switches. But if you lock it, that means that it actually affects all of these, and if the articulation's not in this part of the library, nothing will play here. So you don't have to worry about, something stepping on the other thing. It automatically switches to the right thing. And that allows me to keep things a little bit cleaner. Obviously, it's still a little bit messy. Now, I used to have all the tracks colored by instrument, like if it was all, woodwinds, they're all kind of white or black, I think. If they were all brass, they're this kind of golden yellow color. And what I found actually is that's a terrible way to do things, because when you're getting in and you're messing around with the MIDI data, if both tracks are the same color, the actual MIDI notes are the same color, and you can't tell, am I grabbing bassoon or am I grabbing contrabassoon? So what I found is it's actually, let me show you what that looks like. Right, so the bassoon's in green here, and then I'm going to do clarinet. Right, just whatever. Actually, I'll make it even more difficult. If I copy and paste this, and now we go over to the MIDI data here, and let me show both sets of notes. Let me grab this. You can see if these were the same color, and let me go ahead and change this so that it is the same color. We'll just find that green right there. I don't know if that's the same. Yeah. So let's go back to MIDI. We'll show all tracks. You can see, I don't know which one I'm going to grab here. I could be grabbing this, But if that's above that, I'll think I'm grabbing bassoon or clarinet, and it just makes things confusing. So if you have them as different colors, it actually helps for you to not get confused about which instrument you're grabbing. And I don't care what color they are as long as they're different. So often if I find like, oh, I'm using the contrabassoon and I'm also using, horn solo, and they just happen to be the same color because I randomly selected that, I'll just come in here and I'll just grab a different color and change it. And it usually changes every sequence and, template to template and so on. And then the division of things, I also like to have some sketching stuff, so I have kind of full ensemble right there. I've got, some full ensemble articulations for my strings as well over here. And it's just ways to quickly grab, like if I'm doing some pizzicato, I don't want to have to like do some stuff over here in the violins and then switch tracks to, to the viola and then bass and cello down there. It can just be kind of tedious. So I like to have some of these sketching things, the things that I use most often. So flautando, pizzicato, spiccato. And then, everything beyond that is really just personal. So I've found that loading my synths, I prefer not to load them up in Vienna Ensemble Pro because they usually change every track. I'll have a different sound. So having it built into my Vienna Ensemble Pro template actually makes things a little bit more difficult. If you just load them locally in the sequence here, one, it saves whatever preset you were using for that track, and then two, you can change it on every single sequence. And in Digital Performer, you've got these things called chunks, and you can switch between sequences real quickly. So having them in here is really useful. And because I tend to change them very often, I actually put the instrument tracks right next to the MIDI tracks here as a separate folder. And then let's see what else. That's basically it. That's kind of how I have things routed. Obviously, this is not a full-on course on how to set up a template or anything like that. It's really just how I like to work and move around quickly. The more organized you are, usually the quicker you can actually sit down and start writing music. So for me, I can come in here, and if I've got an idea, I can actually work pretty quickly. Right, I can start to do this stuff, and let's quantize this. And maybe some pizzicato. Let's see. Right, and now I'm already starting to get some ideas down. If I want to find my flutes real quick, let's go to flute here. I'm going to add in a little count-off measure, and let's go ahead and do this. Right, I can just start. Let me do that one more time. I didn't click this. All right, and there's a little bit of a lag here because I've actually got a couple other programs going on the computer right now. But you can see how quickly it is that you can actually jump in and start orchestrating and really moving along. I didn't really talk about everything I have up here. I mean, I've got a standard percussion, standard, pretty much just standard orchestra with some extra stuff. I got storm drum, so I can do my big hits. All right, taikos. I like my little ticky-ticky. Whatever you want. Kind of like Bob Ross. It's like your happy little world. There we go. What's good about having it all set up this way too is that I can really experiment orchestrationally. I can say, what's this going to sound like if I put contrabassoon and flute playing the same thing, or I'm going to pick bassoon maybe instead of contrabassoon. And then I'm going to just transpose this down, like 2 octaves. Right? It's kind of cool. So there we go. That's basically my template, and yeah, just mess around with things and experiment. And you never know how you're going to end up working on your template and what you'll learn from all this process of setting up. But if you want to be a film composer, take the time, really think about how your template is and how you do your workload on each film, and try to come up with something that really makes you more productive and a better composer. So I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.